Are we ready?
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Charles.
Happy birthday to you.
We're making sure that everybody knows. And it's good to see my brother Hank here. I know, look, we got a lot of change that needs to come to Washington, and it requires regular people with the courage to step up, the willingness to jump in the fire, and look, you all are my family, and I'm doing this for family. I know we're going to do the Q A, so I'm not going to preach at you because a lot of you have heard my sermon. But let me say this: it is so far past time for us to legalize cannabis. It really is a slap in the face for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, a place that would be one of the best places, geographically speaking, economic-wise. We would be leaders in the country and create sustainable industry, economic opportunities for folks who have been targeted and really victims of the war on drugs. A lot of communities that have suffered from generational poverty. This isn't just about growing it. And so I appreciate the conversation about tech because this is about everything that goes into an industry. The building of the buildings, the accounting, you need attorneys, the ability to market, all these different aspects that come into creating a new industry that could really be booming for Kentucky. But even beyond the money, it's the healing. It's the chance to address injustice that has been structural and systemic for generations because we've criminalized this plant. And I have served in the House, as you all know, and I'm gonna let the cat out the bag, because some of y'all haven't heard this. So on my committee, when I was a staffer, I'd hear members come in and they'd be in the committee or on the floor, and they would just talk so much trash about cannabis, how evil it is, it's a gateway, all these things that we know aren't true. And then they come in the committee room with just the staff and talk about how they use it.
Right.
Or how their family uses it. And I'm sitting there like, come on, y'all, and look, folks will come to the Capitol, parents will be there talking about the children dealing with epilepsy, folks that are dealing with chronic pain, and explaining how having this access, or the fact that they don't have it, they have to leave Kentucky to get the care that they need. And these folks will look at them with a straight face and demonize them while they use it. So I decided, look, I'm going to step into leadership because we can't afford that anymore. And yeah, we put it on our shirt because I want to be clear, when I go to Washington, we're definitely going to fight hard to legalize it. I want to call it the Gatewood-Garber Legalization Act because it's been a long time coming. And I want to have a good discussion with you all, but thank you for your work. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for standing up for what is right. And thank you for letting me stand by your side.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming. I'm just going to get started here real quick. So, President Biden recently granted pardons to a bunch of convicted criminals that had federal possession charges, which amounts to the most extensive White House action taken to date on U.S. drug policy. While this is great news and a step in the right direction for reform, the action doesn't really affect many Kentuckians. We've got almost a 61 racial discrimination in arrests for marijuana possessions, despite usage rates being relatively the same. So this isn't just an issue for Kentucky. Many states are having this same problem with an enforcement disparity. I mean, would you encourage Governor Andy Beshear to look in doing the same here at a state level? And would you also join in when you're in the Senate with Senator Cory Booker and co-sponsor a version of the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, which deschedules cannabis from the list of controlled substances?
So I've actually already talked to Senator Cory Booker about this. We've built a relationship over the past year and a half, and of course everyone calls me Cory. So yes, it absolutely needs to be descheduled. And I actually did a video yesterday calling on the governor to do just that. President Biden did show very important and critical leadership, and although to your point, it's a step in the right direction. When I was in the House, I was the lead sponsor for legislation to legalize. I filed separate legislation to decriminalize, just to make it clear, look, you all, I'm trying to do this every way I can. And I'll tell you, and you all have seen it, certainly from the medicinal side, which That distinction has always concerned me, just to be honest with you, but I understand, and I joined on to be a co-sponsor for medical cannabis too, and there's overwhelming support, and you all know this, it would pass. Now, the Senate side has been a different story at the state level, but we just need our leadership to show the courage to bring it to a vote. When I get in the Senate, you can expect and count on me to be that ally. And look, we need to legalize it, but we need to go the full extent. We need to expunge, we need to commute census, and then we need to reinvest. To me, this is a step in what reparations would mean to account for systemic injustice. So we know that the war on drugs has targeted communities all across Kentucky in particular. That means we need targeted investment to make sure that when we create this new industry, a lot of regular folks aren't being left behind by it. So you can count on that.
Thank you very much. Kentucky prides itself on the number of veterans and the sacrifices they have made for our country. And while our veterans still wait for the legislature to figure out what kind of medical cannabis bill they want to pass, many veterans across the country are also having difficulty accessing medical cannabis to treat their conditions because the doctors with the Veterans Affairs system, they're not permitted to provide recommendations for this vital medicine in accordance with the laws of 37 states and county. However, Congress has been trying to pass a Veterans Equal Access Act, which would allow VA doctors to recommend medical cannabis to patients, as well as several other amendments designed to provide cannabis protections for veterans. Will you fight for veteran access to medical cannabis, and what other legislation would you sponsor for our veterans?
Yes. Look, I know we're in the choir, but I appreciate the chance to be able to be here to echo and affirm my support. I know this is historic, y'all, and I don't take for granted what it means to have a candidate for the United States Senate to be going across Kentucky talking about legalization. And as I was mentioning before, there's overwhelming support for medicinal cannabis and legalization broadly. And look, when it comes to our veterans, folks who have sacrificed for our country, that have put their lives on the line, we should do everything we can to take care of them and making sure they have adequate health care to address the pain that they may carry from stories that I couldn't fathom. It's a small step in the right direction of saying we appreciate you. And so supporting legislation for our veterans to be able to have the access that they need. And again, look, in Kentucky, we've been hit hardest, certainly one of the hardest hit when it comes to the opioid crisis. And a lot of folks who have been battling pain are some of our most vulnerable, and it's a lot of our loved ones in uniform that, are trying to figure out a way to cope. And I've experienced that in my own family. I also just believe more broadly we need to do everything we can to remove the bureaucracy and red tape that blocks veterans from getting health care generally. And certainly this is why I was just really grossly disappointed in my opponent. I'm not going to name him. I don't have to name him. In my opponent voting against the PACT Act that was essentially expanding health benefits for those who were exposed to toxic chemicals in Agent Orange and burn pits. And the rationale was that, well, how do we know that veterans actually got sick from what they said they got sick from? Man, I wish you could say that to somebody's face. I mean, that was, well, anyway, let me sit that aside. The reason I support Medicare for All and universal basic income and these types of structural investments are really thinking about folks like our veterans who have given their all and then come back to our country or come back home and they're homeless, they're having a hard time getting work, they're battling trauma, they're not getting the care they need. So I'm committed to this. This is a big reason why I'm even running.
Thank you very much. The Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, the SAFE Banking Act, would allow state-licensed marijuana-related businesses to engage freely in relationships with banks and other financial institutions. Currently, thousands of state-licensed cannabis businesses are unable to partner with the banking industry due to these federal restrictions. They are unable to accept credit cards, deposit revenues, access loans, write checks to meet payroll, or pay taxes. While Kentucky doesn't have a regulated cannabis market, our hemp farmers and CBD processors, manufacturers, and retailers are still affected by these financial restrictions. What are you hearing from farmers and other business people in the CBD industry regarding their financial struggles? And if elected, would you vow to end the Senate gridlock on the Safe Banking Act, as well as other key legislation led by the senior senator from Kentucky?
Well, first of all, I think that it's really important because now we've seen it here with hemp legalization. Although there was legalization, there were also so many restrictions that our folks have essentially been choked out. And what we're seeing from a lot of folks who are trying to grow and then get into the hemp industry, that they've had to shut down. And so that's why when I was saying it's not good enough to just say, okay, it's legal now. We have to put provisions in place to make sure that folks aren't getting blocked out, which includes access to capital. And so, yes, I will be a voice for that. And I'm also telling you all now, I will have an open door policy. We're bringing regional offices back, so you're going to have access to me. I'm going to need your help. That's important. I appreciate you applauding for that, because it essentially means that we can have someone that represents us that won't hide from us. But the reason that is important to me is I'm not saying I have all the answers or that I know it all. I'm asking you to go with me to Washington. So these types of policies that are like, okay, it's not enough to just push for the legalization. Don't have this blind spot here. I'm going to need your help in making sure I can be the advocate and the ally that you need. So let's go together.
And while cannabis has been a hot button issue in Kentucky for quite a few years now, with several bills being introduced to institute a medical cannabis program, adult use legalization, and decriminalization, it isn't the only issue facing Kentuckians. Your time in our legislature, you were a sponsor for several cannabis decriminalization and co-sponsoring the medical cannabis bills, but you were also a major proponent for several expungement and consumer protection legislation. You have a proven track record for fighting for Kentuckians, and if elected, what other legislation would you fight for Kentuckians in Washington?
Well, I'll actually take this opportunity to go back to the first question about the governor, since there's cameras recording. I need my friend Governor Beshear to take the step forward to make sure that pardons are happening at the state level, but we also need to do the work of expunging records, and we need to make sure that that's being covered as well. You should not have to come out of pocket to cover a cost for something that you were being targeted and faced injustice over. So when I was in the House, I was a sponsor for legislation for expungements and to reduce those costs, because a lot of the folks, that have been criminalized are coming from communities where they don't have enough money to be able to afford those costs, and it's another barrier to folks. So going to Washington, there's some priorities that I have. Of course, we're talking about legalization and descheduling, doing that structural work. But also, we need to protect democracy in and of itself. So, absolutely. And for me, that means we are removing barriers that are blocking folks from voting. That means we're addressing structural racism in our system. So the John Lewis Voting Rights Act should absolutely be codified. We also need to do the work of getting big money out of politics.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm facing it right now, and it's really remarkable that out of state millionaires and billionaires can say, "Hey, Kentucky, this is what you need. I'm going to create this narrative, put all this money into stories to lie to you, to mislead you, and to make you make a decision that I want you to make." It's wrong, and it blocks a lot of regular folks out. And so, doing the type of work to make sure everyone has access to the ballot box is critical. Secondly, though, we got to codify the rights of women and those who become pregnant to make decisions over their bodies. That is like 1A, 1B for me, because it speaks to a bigger conversation about what it means to have a free and safe society. We're talking about legalization, and that means we have the agency to talk about our rights and what we should be afforded in a society. Well, if the government is saying certain folks are state property or second-class citizens because something that happens to them, even if they're raped or a victim of incest or the pregnancy would kill them, that is dangerous. That's the worst form of big government. And so it really undercuts everything else we're fighting for. And this isn't a slight on anyone's personal position. This is about what the government should be doing. and shouldn't be doing. The last thing that I'll share, because there's a lot I want to do. Infrastructure is really big for me, and when I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm also talking about people. That's where the Kentucky New Deal comes from. We have billions of dollars coming to Kentucky through the infrastructure legislation, even from the rescue plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, which there's challenges in there, but there's some good in there. I want to make sure that the money gets to communities that have been marginalized and forgotten about the most, especially our folks that have lost everything in the storms and have been dealing with generational poverty.
Thanks very much. That's all that I've had. And do we got any questions from people in the crowd tonight? Oh, we got one in the back.
Yes, we're talking about eliminating stops on things that we want. I would like to see the assault weapons ban come back into place. We have so many AR-15s floating around. Old ladies like me go around and shoot apples out of trees with their AR-15s. My dad was a bird hunter. I had probably 3 shotguns, tried to teach me how to shoot a shotgun at 10, and it didn't work, and I don't want one. But, I have nothing against people having a gun in their home, as long as they're real careful with it around kids. But an AR-15 should be in the hands of police and military, and we don't need those. And we wouldn't have a Parkland, we wouldn't have the Connecticut shooting. All of those shootings, well, I can't say all, but many of them were done by young people with an AR-15. And that ban was taken off because of the NRA and the money that you just talked about that goes to certain senators and maybe representatives, but mostly senators. And so that's all I have to say. I didn't hear that mentioned at all, and it's a big thing for me.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. And the person I'm going to defeat in 18-ish days is one of the top recipients of money from the Big Gun Lobby. And look, part of the problem, and you mentioned it with the NRA, has been creating these narratives and the stigma around this discussion where we can't even have it earnestly. I was a director of Fish and Wildlife, as you mentioned. Everybody has a firearm, and it's sacred. It's not used as a weapon. It's a tool. It's an heirloom. It's, like I said, folks are hunting there. And you talk to folks who own firearms, and I know just even talking to you all, you know that AR-15 should not be on the streets. There's nothing really controversial about that at all when you get below the politics. And, I believe that having the leadership to speak that type of truth, we can protect constitutional rights. We can make sure folks have the ability to take care of their families and stay safe and keep our communities safe too. We can do both things, and we need to. And, even in addition to that, like red flag legislation, because you were talking about, these young folks or folks that are dealing with mental health crises. Again, like the health aspect is a big reason why legalization is important to me. But to that point, there's bipartisan support, like overwhelming bipartisan support for this legislation. So it's not like these issues are really that controversial. It has been big money that has dominated the narrative. So that's why I was saying I want to take that on up front. But I want to fight to keep our communities safe. I actually posted about it today. I've had cousins murdered every year since 2016, and 2 we lost by suicide, which is a big issue that is often not talked about. And because of my lived experience, I see this issue with a sense of urgency. So I will be an advocate for that type of safety in Washington.
On that same subject, and speaking about Rand Paul and the money that he's getting, Kate had mentioned got Representative Guthrie, it's the same sort of issue where if you look at Rand Paul, he started his time as a senator with 216,000 maybe, and with the super PACs and nobody has to say who's behind all of that. If you look, it says it's the Republican retirees, or it'll have a name, but you don't know where that money's coming from. And now he has, if you look at the, what is it called, Open Secrets? And it says he's multi-millionaire at this point. Of course, we know that he did insider trading during COVID while he spoke against getting the vaccines. He invested in the COVID vaccination, immune stuff, the therapies. And so I guess I wanted to know what you thought about, Sheldon Whitehouse's Disclose Act, and if we could get that passed so that we could at least name names of who's funding all of these people like Rand Paul. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I absolutely support that. I mean, like I said, that's certainly a step towards the bigger conversation of getting big money, certainly dark money, out of politics. And I love when he breaks it down too. So if y'all should watch some of his discussions on this. But being able to see where these dollars are coming from and what's behind it is a big part of understanding what's really going on. And so keeping us in the dark is also a way of taking our power away and preventing us from being able to make sound decisions and knowing what's happening to us. So I do support that. And, you know, I haven't experienced what this looks like, because there's like a super PAC called Socialist Booker, which, you know, really creative on their part, you know, and to see these types of attacks coming at the expense of Kentuckians, like it hurts, but I'm angry too, because it's coming from folks that don't care about us, you know, and don't care whether we can have clean water or have internet that's not crap or have good jobs. They're just trying to keep power. And that's part of why I'm agreeing to a pledge limit as well, because I don't want to go to Washington to build a career. Rand Paul, look, he's a ridiculous person, but I shouldn't even really say but, I should just leave it there. But if you sort of rewind the clock, you know, and he was running like he's a libertarian, and there's a lot of issues with libertarianism, but there are some aspects where, you know, getting big government out of the way and addressing corruption, and it's like, okay, all right, those things do need to happen. And he's like, well, I'm only going to serve no more than 2 terms, because if you do, you become part of the problem. Like, he's on record saying this over and over again. And here he is living out exactly what he said. And so I'm agreeing to pledge to serve no more than 2 terms, because we need folks that are going to go there to work for us and not go try to get rich.
All the talk about abortion and, you know, kids and other people not having the access, you know, victims of incest. Why isn't there more focus on the laws with these violations? Because I looked them up, and according to what I looked up, Montana is the only one that has any kind of strict laws. Why isn't there more focus on making these laws stricter for these predators, family members that are impregnating these little babies, you know, the victims? Why is that not focused on?
What a important question. I mean, what we're seeing now, and if you're looking at some offices around the country, where it's almost like they're trying to protect rapists.
They are, and it's incredible what the laws are for acts of incest. And now that they're trying to criminalize protecting these babies, you know, a 10-year-old has no business having a baby, especially through no fault of her own. Yeah. And the laws they want to pass criminalizing these doctors is insane compared to they should be focusing on these predators.
Yeah.
And this situation, it's disgusting.
Well, one thing that I can say, being respectful of time, is that this is why empowering our voices, lifting our voices to be citizen lobbyists and to tell our story is really important. A lot of change doesn't happen because it sort of gets swept, under the rug. And an issue like incest typically falls in the realm of like family secrets. and things that people don't talk about. And until we tell the story, until we speak the truth, and which is why I'm so vulnerable in my experiences. And I was sharing earlier, man, I'm just really grateful because my mom, she's my super hero. She's everything to me. Thank you, because I'm so proud of her. I'm proud to be her son. But she had 4 miscarriages, and she was telling me a couple days ago, because she's seen me speaking up, for the rights of women, those who become pregnant, for the agency to make decisions over their bodies. And she was like, "Well, son, I nearly died because I had 2 ectopic pregnancies, and I didn't know that." She had never said anything, and she found her voice and wanted to share that this was her experience. And that's where our power comes in, when we use our voice. So there's a video that I shared, and if y'all haven't seen it, go to my social media. It's Miss Janie. This is a one from Floyd County that is telling her story about being a nurse.
I reshared it.
Yeah, please share that. And we're trying to raise some money to get that on TV, because she's telling a story about the experience as a nurse of having to deliver a pregnancy for a child who was a victim of incest.
And it's just horrible.
And she found the courage to start speaking up. And I believe that's how we can apply pressure to change laws.
So Charles, I just wanted to say, number one, thank you for saying that. I myself have been a victim, like this lady was talking about, of systemic abuse from, government agencies. And just what this lady saying, with the guns, yes, that's one part of it, but the other part of it is people not being able to speak about it, people being directly victimized from big government and then having to keep it quiet. And what do you do with that quietness if you don't feel like you have any power? If you're dehumanized by your own government, then you act out. So that's huge. That's a huge matter to me, is to be able to say, hey, this happened to me, and just because I was sanctioned by the court, just because I was a criminal for using sanctions medically, having to keep silent about that is really what the second part of what oppresses people and causes them to just lose it and to lose acts of impunity. So I wanted to bring that up. The second thing is, I am interested just to know what your thoughts on immigration are, illegal immigration, refugees, and influxing.
So on the first part, thank you. And thank you for your strength. And like I said, when you speak up and you shine your light, it's contagious. And when folks realize it's okay, more will, and that gives us the room to change things. When it comes to immigration, we are so far behind in terms of creating real pathways and putting into place the types of protections for those who are coming, seeking to have a better life, seeking the dream that we were often taught about. I do believe we need to advance legalization. There should be a path to do that. We need to codify DREAM Act. We need to do that type of work. I see this from the standpoint of keeping families safe, building a sustainable economy, and just humanity. I say it all the time, nobody is illegal. Like, no human being is illegal. And, when you're thinking about folks that are seeking asylum, essentially being criminalized and then put in a system and separated from their families, is really barbaric, and it's counter to our ideals as the United States, at least the things that we've said we aspire to. And so I intend to go to Washington and to lead that fight for legalization, but also for pathways to immigration, make sure that folks that are here and that are looking to come here have the support and protections they need. And we can do that and keep our country safe at the same time.
so much, Ms. Wilder, for coming here.
Absolutely.
We all are grateful for that. I wanted to mention, while I have your ear, I am a parent of an adult with disability. We're from a nonprofit, I founded a few years ago that serves them. And so I wanted to speak to you as an advocate for a lot of families that I care about who their children with epilepsy. Medical marijuana is literally a lifesaver for a lot of folks. So that, of course, I appreciate your work on that. And I also just wanted to mention to you as a parent advocate for a lot of people here that as far as cannabis in Kentucky, and one of the issues that stands in the way of people with disabilities getting the care that they need is that mandatory drug testing. Because there are a lot of agencies that provide, they hire people that provide the care, one-on-one care. And if you use cannabis at all, and that includes CBD, if you trip a positive test, then you can't do that. So we're losing a lot of potentially really loving and great employees just for that reason. That's not to go. And I just want to say to keep our folks with disabilities in mind when it comes to Medicaid waivers and funding those waivers, and how important it is. There are a lot of families in crisis who have grown kids with disabilities and can't get the services they need years and years and years long. And so just wanted to put that in your ear as you head out and you wear this
Well, one thing I'll say is that's exactly why you gotta come with me. You gotta go Washington with me. Because we gotta make sure whenever there's a blind spot, the folks who are most vulnerable fall in, and so I appreciate your advocacy. Certainly understand that, you have your why, your story, but I appreciate you doing this.